What's really interested me about your work recently is what you've done with, in terms of, corporate innovation and that kind of thing, and working on the structure to facilitate continuous corporate innovation. What's your theory there, and what are kind of the systemic problems with corporations?
That's a great question, and I'm going to give you a long academic answer, and then I'm actually going to answer your question. The irony is, of course, that in the last decade or so, large corporations have realized that the 21st century rules are very different from the 20th century rules. And I think Forbes and others have articulated very well all the reasons why, right? Where China Inc., globalization, just plummeting barriers for competitors to enter, instantaneous knowledge via the internet for consumers, taste changing, right? I mean, we go through the whole list. And therefore, the sum of that means that companies in the 21st century are facing continuous disruption. Continuous. So all the rules that they had learned in the 20th century, which worked great, classic one is Jack Welch's, you need to be number 1 or 2 in a market, we're going to compete on share. Well, you do that, you're going to go out of business in the 21st century. It's not that that's dumb, but there's other strategies that entrants will use. Really, you want to be number 1 and 2 in that market? Great, we're going to create another market. Whoa. Now all of a sudden new market creation is an opportunity for an entrant. And if you're the defender, here you are defending this ecosystem which might be obsolete. For example, you've invested in all this manufacturing plant. Great, I'm going to China. Oops, now your investment in all that capital equipment might be actually obsoleted by a competitor. So there are lots of moves that entrants can make that they couldn't before. And so large corporations in the US, but obviously worldwide, are faced with dealing with continuous innovation. Now I'm going to close the story in the loop, is that the Lean Startup ended up on the cover of May 2013 Harvard Business Review. And the only reason I mention that is that for the first time I started getting calls from corporations going, hey, nice thing about startups, but you mentioned this could always also help corporations. Can you give us a hand? But the people calling me had titles I had never heard of. They were called VP of Innovation or Chief Innovation Officer. And I had been out of the corporation for about a decade. We never had those out. Who are these people? And I spent a couple months working with a couple of large companies just to find out what the heck was going on. And what's going on is almost every large Fortune 1000 company has realized what I've just told you is they're not dumb. The world has changed. We need to deal with it. But rather than understanding that this is a systemic problem across all corporations, every company is attempting to solve it tactically themselves.
Sure.
What we have today in the 21st century is the equivalent to the strategy problem that corporations were facing in the beginning of the 20th century. The internet has changed the world completely. The cycle times of large corporations for innovation means our existing structures, P&L business units, advanced R&D in the corner over here, M&A over here, VC group over here. That stuff doesn't work anymore, and what we're trying to do right now is throw in another organization, and we'll call it the innovation group, but we've not come up with a way to kind of integrate them together, and that's because we've been too timid.
Right.
We've been too afraid to say, no, it isn't the solution isn't another group. The solution is actually blowing up the architecture completely and figuring out how to make continuous innovation an integral part of the organization.
Sure. You need a holistic solution.
You bet. And it's not something that's going to just magically appear. In fact, there's examples in corporate history where there have been times in the 20th century that companies actually invented this, forgot how to do it because it wasn't essential, but now it is. So for example, in the 70s and 80s, HP created something like 45 divisions. One guy, Chuck House, was responsible for most of them, and they lost the formula. IBM, when they came out of their crisis, actually figured out how to make innovation part of their corporate DNA. Apple and Amazon have figured out how to do it as well. And usually those were organizations created in extreme crisis or the focus of an extreme individual.
Right.
What we really need to know how to do is take those best practices and make those just kind of a common corporate type. And in the next year or so, I think the work I'm going to do with Henry Chesborough at Berkeley, who invented open innovation, and Alexander Osterwalder, obviously the father of the business model design, we've been thinking about what is a canonical model for the 21st century organization, and hopefully we could add something to this discussion.
Can you telegraph any characteristics of that model? You know, what Amazon and Apple and IBM and HP during their heydays have in common?
I think you said the magic word.
Yeah.
And it's one that, you know, if you're a tried and true P&L general manager, it makes you rankle. It's holistic. You know, it's holistic. I need to make the numbers, right? And I think this is the antithesis of I need to make the numbers, because it requires you to ask, well, what numbers do you need to make? And I think this is going to be a little wrenching for both not only companies, but Wall Street as well.
Sure.
I think we're going to end up, and let me vaguely not answer your question by telling you the consequence. We're going to have two types of companies. We're going to have companies that continue the existing way, and my prediction is their trajectories on the street will be 5 to 10 years of great profit and then a going out of business sale as they decline. Or we're going to have companies that continually reinvest in innovation, continually, with probably lower profits, more like an Amazon model, but are going to be around for decades. And in fact, on the street, you're going to be able to pick which one you want to invest in, because you're going to be able to see the difference in those models. You want short-term profits? You know, invest in the people who have a 20th century corporate organization. You want to invest in something that's going to be around for 30 or 40 years, because they're able to keep up with the integral changes that are happening now in society and technology, et cetera. This stuff isn't going to slow down. Innovation is going to continue, sure. And unless you have a corporate structure that just rolls with that, I think we're going to see some major changes.